Hey, friends. Welcome to the Garden of Mutual Delights. I'm really excited about today's show. I know we're starting a little earlier than normal. I have my friend James Ruchalski with me, and over the last few years, James and I have gotten to play music together quite a bit. Generally, he's playing lead guitars, and we get to sing together. And I have a whole lot of really talented and gifted friends. James is definitely one of them. One of the things that I love about his playing is he is musically omnivorous, and so he's equally able to play on pretty much any style of music that he sets his mind to. So, without further ado, this is James Ruchalski. We're live.
Hey, how you doing, Jeremy?
Good, man. Thanks so much for being on the show.
Oh, always happy to jump in and get involved in the craziness.
Right? Well, speaking of craziness, I wanted to talk a little bit, like usually with guests, I like to talk about, what got them into the thing that they're passionate about. So, can you talk a little bit about what got you into guitar or music in the first place, and what did that look like?
Yeah, so I probably shared some of this with you before, but you might find it interesting that I actually had no interest or taste in music at all as a child, and and just didn't want anything. Just thought it was kind of dumb. Like I don't know how to say it, but just was like, oh, that's just I don't know. I liked everything else, like all kinds of other things. And then when I moved from the city to the country, I was really bored. And this school bus kept passing a guitar store that had a guitar in the window. And so I told my parents, I was like, I think I want to learn guitar, which was really out of just left field for them. They were like, okay. And because I couldn't walk to anything. I grew up in the city, like in Philly, and I couldn't walk to anything anymore when we moved. And so I wanted
Right.
something to do in there. And I just fell in love with it. In like 5 minutes of playing guitar, I was like, this is the only thing I ever want to do with my time. So I was about 15, and that was it. Just from there on, just couldn't stop playing. And then as soon as I started that, like my family, like all these things opened up, like that I never knew about. My dad was like, "Oh, I used to love '80s rock and hair metal," and I was like, "Never heard of any of this." And so like he
Right.
started sharing me with like his breaking, blowing dust off records from the garage and things. And like I started going to see these bands. Some of them were, like Megadeth and Maiden, and then that was it. Like when I saw Dave Mustaine on stage, I was like, I never had feelings like that in my life, and so that was just it. Like I just couldn't stop. I was just hooked, and
Wow.
so I went from starting high school having no interest in any of that stuff to by the time I graduated high school, people just knew me as the kid, like the guitar guy. Like, hey, he plays guitar. Like that's his thing. That's his whole
Right.
life. So
Oh, that's
a
wild.
little bit of yeah.
So when you first started playing, um, like what was that experience like? Did you have lessons at first, or were you basically teaching yourself how to play everything?
No, I took lessons. I had a really great teacher just in the town where I went to high school where my parents grew up. And what I always, not joke or tease, but I always say that he taught me how to love the guitar just as much as like actually learning how to play it, which
Yeah.
seems like an odd thing to say, but there's just like an appreciation for like how, I don't know, how you can be so creative with the instrument as opposed to just like learning how to play something.
Yeah.
Know what I mean? So like that, even like what you said about like the genres spanning and all that stuff, like it was really about like how can you play along with this. So
Right.
if you only know how to play like Black Sabbath or Iron Maiden, like you can't play along with Nile Rodgers stuff. And it doesn't mean that you knew how to play Nile Rodgers, but just like how can you make your instrument fit in with what's going on around everything else. So his approach to loving the instrument was really inspirational.
That's I think that's a really important lesson, and maybe one that a lot of people maybe take for granted. Like, so in those early lessons, it kind of sounds like what was what kind of, let me start over. What kind of exercises was your teacher suggesting that you start figuring out how to play intelligently to different genres?
We started, I mean, with everything, we started out with like riffs. So like as soon as my dad heard I was in a guitar, he was like, like the Trooper from Iron Maiden and a couple of Black Sabbath tunes and some
Mm-hmm.
AC/DC and like and Metallica and all these things. And so I started learning these riffs. I wasn't like playing full songs, and I would learn how to play. But then he would always have me do something that was really out. Like he'd be like, "All right, now we're gonna just listen to this bossa nova track, and we're gonna take the stuff we were doing with the trooper and make it fit over this, you know what I mean? Like things like that. And
Yeah.
so that to me was more fun in some ways than playing along with the song, because when you just play by yourself, and you know, and I'm sure a lot of people listening, you know, have that kind of approach. Like when you play by yourself, it's like fun, but like you're like, I'm trying to think of the right way to explain it, but you're not. There's no concept of how it impacts. Like you can stop, you can start over, you can mess up, you can not like. It's almost worse. You're almost more judgmental of your playing because you're like, oh, like
Yeah.
there's nothing else. So like if it's not right, like you back up or you slow down or you just get sloppy and you like replay the same thing till it's perfect, which is good for certain types of practice, but it's not good for like noodling and enjoying. You know, you can't takes the joy out of it if you're like super like hypercritical of everything you're doing.
Yeah.
And so what he would always have me do is he had this little thing, which I'm very surprised that people know what this is anymore, but it's called a G deck. It's a Fender, the letter G, and then DEC, Fender G deck. And it was essentially a digital Fender amp that had maybe 70 different backing track styles that just looped constantly. They never stopped. So it would be like a 4 or 8 chord progression that just, you change the key, it would warp it to be anything. And it was a rhythm section, blocking piano. So it's just like chunk, like, boom, da-da, da-da. Like it wasn't like this, you know, it's just like blocking out chunk, but it would be in the style of whatever. And they were some of the worst MIDI, like looking back on it, they were awful, but now I love them. Like, but there were only like 7 I knew how to play along with. So
Yeah.
there was like a blues one, there was a bossa one, there was a couple of other jazz ones, there was a metal one that was horrible. All it was double kick and like it was like it wasn't metal. It was like, I don't know. It was like the beginning of Hot for Teacher. Like it wasn't a song. It was just
Right.
like going. But anyway, I would sit at home and I would play with this for literally hours, like 4 or 5 hours. I ended up buying one because he had one in the studio where he taught lessons, and I loved it. And so my parents got it for me like right after I started playing, and that was all I would do. So this was before you could YouTube track backing tracks and things
Right.
like that. Like, and it was like the beginning of YouTube. And I would just sit there and I would play with it, and for hours and hours and hours and hours. And my mom would just close the door. Like she was like, she always will tell me later. She's like, I made a point not to tell you to stop, even though like until it was like real late. She's like, or I would put headphones in it, you know. And she was
Right.
like, because I'd never seen you do anything like that.
Yeah.
Because I grew up, I was a hockey player, and like I played for teams, and I, you know, I would like I was, but I didn't just sit at home and play. You know, you had to be at a rink or doing stuff. So like
Right.
it was like the only thing I guess they'd ever seen me do that like I just would just go to do. Like I get home from school to play guitar. I'd do some homework, I'd go back to play guitar. I'd have dinner, I'd play guitar. I'd do all the stuff that was going on. And then it was just, I mean, that's just how it worked around. It was just crazy. But I was just obsessed with it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that kind of checks out. I mean, anybody who's heard you play knows that like you've got serious chops, which means lots of hours. One of the kind of like through lines on this show has been I've been talking to a number of different performers about how what people see is kind of the tip of the iceberg in terms of like the amount of thought and effort that goes into that finished product. So, like, flash forward to now, what does a typical week look like for you? Like, trying to get ready for like going out on a tour or a performance, or just keeping your skills maintained.
Well, it kind of varies. It goes between different. A lot of times, it's a lot of back end work. So, like a typical week is tends to be more keeping up with schedules than it is. You know what I mean? So I just took a new job with a touring group. I've been playing with them for a little bit, and the lead up to that was nuts because it was just nothing but, you know, they had like a 110 song catalog of things. You know, so it was just like going through and burning through and burning through. But
Yeah.
a regular week is kind of like I try to stay brushing up on things that I feel like I need work on. If that makes sense?
Right.
Play a lot, but I always try to make space for like noodling or enjoying playing. So I'll play for a bit, but I probably play for about 3-4 hours a day intermittently, like not straight through, but I'll just
Right.
keep playing. But yeah, when I picked up that tour job, I mean, every day for 3, 4, 5 hours, I was just trying to learn music because you got to chunk it all together and, you know, get things
Yeah.
together.
I mean, 110 songs is that's a heavy repertoire.
Yeah, it's something. It's more than a few, but it's fun because some of them were just so easy to put off book.
Okay.
Like some of them were like it was just so riff based that a chart wasn't going to help you.
I gotcha.
You know, you're just like, I just have to learn how this goes. Like, I can't
Right.
think about this. But then there are others that were like, I feel like it's the opposite. You'd think the easier songs are the ones you'd memorize, but that's not the case. When something's like just chords,
Hmm.
I'll just keep a chart and I'll be like, great, I learned that one. And I'll never actually, like, it'll take me months to actually memorize it because I don't spend the time on it. Whereas, like, something that's like, I think they play, what's one? China Grove, I think, I think it's by the Doobie Brothers. I honestly don't remember who it is.
Yeah.
But it's all riffs. So even
Oh
though there's
yeah.
chords, you could chord it out. It's like it's very rarely just the chord. It's like a chord and then some kind of hammer on or slide, and so I just learned the songs. Like forget it. So there's no chart for that one, but I just memorize. It's like we just have to go because I can't spend the time trying to read this and remember like oh it says B minor, but it really means all this other stuff. Like I was
Right.
like yeah. So, but yeah, a typical day is lots of playing, and then the occasional food. Occasional food.
It's important to eat.
Yeah. But I find it's stressful if you don't. Maybe this is the wrong space to talk about this, but like one of my big challenges is what I do is I don't have my own style. So I find that I put a lot of like I get in my own head, or I get a lot of like I don't want it's not I don't want to call it like depressive, but like really clouded playing times because it's like yeah, but that's what you have to learn. What do you do?
Yeah.
And I don't really know how to answer. And even still to this day, I don't know that I can answer that question. Like I've done so many things that are not, you know, anything I'll ever play again. It's just stuff I had to play for that. And so like, and everybody does that where they learn stuff for things. But like for me, it's been a career of that. Like
Hmm.
I've played things in shows that were like so genre specific that I like became that type. You know, it's like I'm a surf rock player for 6 months. And then I never play. Now I retain some of the stuff, but like that's not me. That's not how I play. And then so it's like I have that kind of like identity crisis, if that makes sense. So like noodling can be stressful because it's like, what do I do? And so that's why I try to make time for that because I think it's
Hmm.
important to feel like I have an identity that makes sense to me. But
Yeah. Well, yeah. I think that's wise though. I mean, with any of us who are trying to do something creative, there's sort of like the stuff that we like to do. There's the stuff that we're, you know, getting paid to do if like we've gotten to that point where we've made a career out of our creative output. And like if we're lucky, like there's some overlap there, but that's not always true. So, um what kind of things what kind of things keep you lit up and keep you excited about playing guitar?
well, I used to push this too far, but now I think I found the balance. I used to try to make things not sound like guitar players because to me, most guitar players, and it's not across the board, but when you go to, before COVID and you would go to like local bars or things and stuff, everybody to me sounds the same. They have the same kind of like, it's a very predictable guitar sound or style. It's like, it's just the guitar player. And I used to like really push against that because it's like, I want to be different, which I think is healthy. But I also then have learned that sometimes that's what people expect and need. And
Mm-hmm.
it just makes something feel right and it brings it together. So to that degree, for me, I like to try to make things feel interesting or creative alongside things that feel very predictable and very like cliche guitar. And so I had a friend when I was on tour, on a previous tour, who told me, and he had his master's. He'd gone to like college in New York for guitar, and he said his guitar teacher told him one of the first weeks that he was there, "You don't play the pentatonic scale enough." And he's like, I'm paying X amount of dollars a year. I'm getting my master's, and this is what they're telling me. Like, and it really hit me because it was very perspective shifting. Because I think we try to be better than that.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? And I think that's, to me, I've learned that's the wrong approach. Like, it's, to me, to be better than that is like kind of a snob comment. Like, oh, I'm above the pentatonic scale. And like, I really, learning from him and just being on a bus with him and playing gigs with him, like, I kind of learned that like sometimes it's just what it needs. So what keeps things interesting is how can I make something interesting that still feels like what it needs and doesn't feel like it's, I don't want to call it math rock, but like, because it's not always rock, but like where I'm not just doing stuff because I know how to do it.
Yeah.
I'm actually doing stuff that fits and works with it. So I try to challenge that where it's like, okay, here's a pentatonic scale. Like, how can I add one note or how can I do something that's going to make this feel creative and inspirational and not just like a cookie cutter thing, if
Yeah.
that makes sense. But I've definitely gained a huge appreciation for making things simpler, not because they're easy, or not to make them easy, but just to make them palatable. Like to just, it's what it needs, you know?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I know one of the conversations that we've had a lot over the years is like really listening to what's going on and trying to play intelligently based on like what you're hearing and what it's actually going to add. And sometimes like the simplest thing in the world or even a rest is really the thing. And I think
Yeah.
that can be a hard it can be hard to get out of the mindset like, well, I'm up here and I have an instrument, so people are looking at me like I need to be playing, or like, but it's not like I don't know, it's not like some jobs where if you're standing around somebody will tell you to clean or do something else. It's like you're
Yeah.
actually contributing by not playing in that moment, which is probably something that we as musicians don't talk about enough.
Yeah. Well, I tell when I do music directing, because I've gotten involved with that pretty heavily in the last 4 or 5 years. Well, 5 or 6 years now. But I always try to tell bands like play the rests, like actually play them as though they're your notes. Like that's what you have to play instead of counting them. A
Yeah.
lot of people count the space. It's like no, play it as though it may feel insignificant to you in the moment, but I feel like it gets you more engaged in the song. Like it
Mm-hmm.
helps you feel more like you're participating even when you're not. Because yeah, I mean, people will tell you, and I struggle with this even still, but I feel like I'm getting better, much better with it. I would like to hope. But people will tell you, like, well, you're paying for me to be up here. I might as well be doing something, and it's like that's why I try to say, like, play the rest. And I've been teaching it for years, but maybe just finally understanding how important it really is recently. Where I'm like, you gotta play the space and let that be your contribution for a little bit, so that when you do come in, it's that much more. It contributes, and it's that much more important, or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. Like in scenarios it's different, but yeah, definitely play the rest.
Oh, for sure. So,
Some Oh, good.
no, no.
Oh, no, I just something else I found that really maybe is a little cliche, but that idea of like singable melodies. It's really, I mean, you say it and we know that we say it and we do it. And I don't want to be that guy who's like just saying cliches, but I think cliches are cliches because they're usually spot on, and when it's important, that's why we keep saying it. But making things more singable is something I've been trying to do, and like appreciating like a harmony in what you're playing, as opposed to two notes simultaneously, as opposed to 40 notes in the same space. And it's
Yeah.
it's it's not something. There are people much worse than I was, who like can't stop playing. So like I don't feel like I'm on that level, but as I'm constantly evaluating and playing, I've learned that like just if it feels singable, it's probably better.
Mm-hmm.
Probably means a little more to the song.
Yeah. Kind of related over the last over the last year especially. I as you know, I've been playing a lot of like early music, so like medieval music and Renaissance music. And one of the things that I've loved about that is I've gotten so much more conscious of melody. And like these are really strong melodies. Like they've managed to survive for like a few hundred years. So it's really done something, I think, for the way that I perceive like what constitutes a singable melody.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah,
Even like it's so dumb, but it isn't. Like it's because you want to kick yourself and you make things harder than you have to. But like even repetitive things,
yeah,
like it feels repetitive to you, but to a listener, that's like a welcome consistency.
yeah. Well, like if the
Oh,
riff is good, like I know I'll listen to like one riff through a whole song.
mhm.
If it's got the right like strength and the right tone, it's like, yeah, I can listen to this riff for the next hour, and that's cool.
Yeah, yep. I find that I catch myself changing things because I'm bored, or making something more difficult because I'm bored when that's not what my job is. And so it takes, I mean, it's like I said, it's been worse, and I'm sure other people are way, like, so I'm kind of middle of the road, but I feel like I'm at least observing and paying enough attention to move to that. And I think that's the beauty of playing genres. Like, if any advice I would ever give anybody is if you want to get better, play something you don't know how to play and be okay with being bad at it. Like, don't play it to perfect it.
Right.
Just like play along with if you don't play bossa nova, and that was our thing last night that we were talking, but if you don't play bossa nova, play along with it, and limp through it and be terrible at it. But by the time, if you play it consistently, like once a day, every day for a week, you'll be so much better by the end of the week, and then you'll play your other stuff so much better because you have this like grounding and perspective shift of like, here's how instruments interact in other genres or other things. And so, but the idea of repetitive, like there's a video going around of like, they were calling it the world's worst jazz solo, but they were breaking down Adam Neely, real famous YouTube guy, does music stuff, and he's talking about, is it really? And then they like investigate it, and they're like, he plays one note the whole time. Like the band's changing to it, and it's the rhythm and it's all that stuff. And so like he's like, this particular example is bad, but they go to other examples where they're just playing one note and it's great. And so I've like tried to like embrace those ideas of like making something singable or relatable or not predictable, but like comfortable, where someone's like, oh, I hear that, and I hear it over and over. And I've said this for years, even before I really got the concept, but you can do a double stop, and you can slide, for any of the guitar players, you can do a double stop and just slide over and over and over again during a solo. And there's like a point where people start to cheer. Mm-hmm. And it always happens in every show I've ever done. Even if I'm music directing, I always tell somebody like, do this. And I promise you, like the first 4 times you're like, why am I still doing this? But like 5, 6, 7 people start like, woo, and it's probably the easiest thing you played all morning or all afternoon, whatever. But it's the thing that gets the most reaction because people, they connect with something like that.
Yeah. Whereas
if you start going through all these crazy scales, runs and arpeggios, it's like some people connect with it and technically it's cool, but it goes over people's heads in such a way where they become observers.
Right.
And not participants.
Yeah.
And so I know that lick because it's like a Stevie Ray kind of thing, but you just like, and you do it and then you overdo it and people start going, they're like, ooh, and like every bar, every place, like you hear it and it's like, it always got me. I'm like, why is that what people cheer for? Because there's literally no skill in this compared to what I was just doing 5 seconds ago, but that's fine, So I think that helps. Having space for yourself to noodle where you can impress yourself is good and have fun. Mm-hmm. But when it involves other people, I think there's I don't want to call it an obligation, but there's a sense of I should be doing this for us, not for me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're playing in front of an audience, and like, so there's levels of like that listening, like there's listening to the band and making sure that you're contributing there, but then there's paying attention to the audience, like how are they receiving kind of what you're laying down, and if you've lost them, you've lost them. But
yeah,
if you can bring the audience along and like take them somewhere special, I mean, then you've done your job. Like whatever the genre is, like I think, at least from myself and from talking to other friends who are music fans as well as musicians, like, I mean, I know I want to go out and have kind of like a transcendent experience where like I'm not necessarily sitting there like, wow, that was a really cool bit of technique right there. Like that might happen at a show, but more likely It's kind of like, wow, what's the vibe here,
Yeah. Well, yeah, and again, it's cliche, but especially in the last like 2 years, I've really come to this point where like I used to play to try to convince other people I belonged. And that's like a dangerous game of not just dangerous because you'll never do that. Like you'll never be able to, the people who don't want you there or don't think you're good enough very rarely will come around, so it's kind of a really bad uphill battle, but also it's like damaging to yourself because you never have that sense of like confidence or security because everything you do is waiting on the approval of, so like you could play something great, but if you don't get what you expected to get, like then you doubt all that stuff and it like really eats away at you. So having that mentality of like, I know that, like, again, not playing for, I know that people want to hear me and I know that I'm here. And so in my case, like, when I was on the tour, it's like, I don't have to keep waiting for somebody to be like, you belong here. This is good. Like, they haven't fired me, so I must belong here. You know what I mean? They're still letting me
in the first place as your first indicator.
Yeah, well, you're there in the first, exactly. And so, like, and I've had people tell me that, like, when I was real young, and it meant a lot to me then. But I think I've, in a desperate attempt to make a career, have forgotten some of that stuff. So it's good things to circle back and think about. But like, the fact that you're there is a good sign. So go with that instead of giving somebody instead of like keep asking people, do you want me to come back?
Right.
Just keep coming back till they stop calling you. Keep delivering, and just believe that like enjoy it because it goes by so quick. And anyone who's played a live show or anyone who's been on a tour, or played like a weekend, like a couple days in a row, like if you don't learn to have fun being there and you're always worried about it being good enough or being like, you don't have fun with it. And I'm really proud of myself in that sense of growth. And a lot of that comes from, I'll do my plug now. A lot of that comes from like therapy and working on yourself and development and not just like, screaming into your pillows every day. Like a lot of things come from taking the time. But after years of doing that, especially the last year and COVID and all this stuff, like I just got to the point, like I was playing in I got my vaccine. I'm able to like start going and playing some gigs with this fly dates with this band. And we were playing at a like a big showroom and casino in Michigan. And I was playing and I just remember like every minute of being there. And I was like, this is nice. Because I didn't used to. I used to get back to the like hotel after the gig being like, oh, it's over. And like all I did was panic or all I did was think that riff wasn't going to work or whatever. And like, I remember like just being on stage, being like, I'm just having fun playing. Like, this is cool. These guys are cool. This is a good time. And like it's taken a long, this is 2021 is my 10th year of working, like professionally working in music. So I got my first job in 2011, working with a company in Nashville. And like, every year since then, I've been able to do stuff. And so it took some time. But I think I'm hopefully, it's the beginning of the first 10 years of many decades, and I'm on the upswing, and it'll be a healthy 10 years forward.
Oh yeah. Let's. Here's to that.
Yes, to that for sure. But you just get so much in your own head, and we don't have to live here, but just for anybody that like plays, like it's so easy to get stuck in like your own, like the wheels turn, like you. But I always like somebody always says like people don't hear you the way you hear yourself.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
You hear yourself with everything wrong and everything, because and it's fair. It's probably somewhat accurate. So it's not to be mean or it's not to like lie to yourself, but people don't hear it. And so having a healthy like evaluation of like, can I get better at that? Can I work on that? Yeah. But like, did that ruin everybody's night? Probably not. So I shouldn't let it ruin mine, like having that kind of.
Yeah. Well, backing up a little bit, I mean, what are some things that you've found in the last little while that have helped you kind of relax and enjoy being on stage more?
I mean, one of the first things is what I said about like having a healthy evaluation of your playing, like being able to do stuff and understand that like if they call you, they're not telling you not to come back. So that perspective is, to me, has been very formative. Some other things though has been like finding places where you can express yourself. So like one of the things that I started doing at the beginning of this year was I started doing Twitch because I wanted a place where I could play kind of, pardon the expression, but balls to the wall. Like it could be I could go as wild as I wanted and it was totally for me.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like we could just do crazy stuff and it could fall all apart. It didn't matter because I wasn't auditioning for a job. I wasn't. So having, maybe it's not Twitch, but for somebody else, like having an outlet where you can make mistakes, where you can play stuff that's too hard or whatever, and it not feel like it's detrimental to you. So like my Twitch is meant to be like completely raw. Like there's no production. We're just having fun and people call out genres and like we just Google a track, that's like we've never played this. Here we go. And like so where it's like, but that's helped me because it's made me feel more confident when the camera is on. So like when I have to play something else, I've gotten all that out of my system. I play every a couple times a week like that. So like it feels like it's given me a purpose to my practice, if that makes sense.
Yep.
As opposed to just aimlessly practicing and feeling like you're just getting worse because you're not getting the things you need to get right or you want to get right. And so you don't have so it's fun because people who listen to the Twitch, most of them aren't guitar players. So they just have fun. They're like, that was great. I'm like, oh, it was terrible, but cool. If it's passing for you guys, then it must not be as bad as I feel like it is. So that's one thing. Another thing has been listening to people. I love listening to other guitar players, famous guitar players, of course, but other guitar players. I really, really enjoy. I was just music directing in Richmond, and this kid could play. He was fantastic. So inspirational. And the first thing I did when I came back from the trip was like picked up guitar, and I was like, man, I want to play after hearing him play, and he's not famous. He's playing at a theme park for the summer. And that's not a knock on that. I just mean helping put perspective in, but he was great and finding people like that. So I've tried to like learn from everybody that I play with or hear play because I'm trying really hard to make music less of a competition, which is hard. It's very hard to do that. But to find things like where you hear people make music and enjoy that. And then the other thing, like I think I already said, but was play styles, play stuff that you don't feel good about playing and experiment with that stuff and kind of get messy, for lack of a better way to explain it.
Yeah. So we've got the link to your Twitch channel in the chat.
Okay.
When can people like tune in to see you play?
Well, with my schedule of fly dates, it's been up in the air a little bit, but usually Tuesdays and Thursdays.
Okay.
So I was on last night. I'll be on tomorrow night. I'll be on next Tuesday. Should be on next Thursday. We'll see how it all rolls around. Sometimes it's Mondays, but I'm more consistently Tuesday and Thursday around 8:00. Like tomorrow, we'll be starting at like 8:45 because I'll be coming from something else. But I try to keep the Twitch schedule updated, but I'm not the best at that. But
feel you.
Yeah, if you follow it, you'll get the notification when it goes live. So there you go.
That's true. So, you were talking a little bit about a tour that's been going on now. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, actually, some of you might know the group because they became real famous about 9 or 10 years ago. So I'm playing with a band called Rick Kay and the All Nighters, and they are famous for their YouTube video from, like I said, 9 or 10 years ago called Drummer at the Wrong Gig. And it's the video of the band. Look it up. It's a video of a band with this drummer who's just like, they're a show band. So they do like, they start in the 1950s and they end by the end of the night. They're doing stuff that's on the radio right now. So like, some brand new. So it's like a variety show that kind of goes through decades. But they dress up, they wear like nice suits and they do this whole thing. Like that's their shtick. And this guy's like in a sequin suit and and they're playing like ZZ Top. They're not playing, it's like just your standard, whatever, 2 and 4. But he's just, they're boots and cats as people call it. But he's just like, his arms are flailing. He's flipping the stick back and forth. He's making faces. And I remember seeing that video and I said these exact words. I said, "What do you have to do to get a gig like that?" Because I thought it was so cool. And then here, 9 years later, through connections of other things, they were looking for a guitar player and came across my desk, and I was like, yeah, let's do it. So they're doing what I call fly dates. So they're on a tour, and I think I gave you a link to their schedule. But
yeah, that's up in the chat now.
They do. They essentially do events or festivals or things, and then so instead of a bus tour like the tour I did a couple years ago was, where you're just on the bus city to city for like the whole block.
Yeah.
You go and come back. So I'll be in Pittsburgh, then West Virginia this weekend, then I'll come home. Then I'll be in Indiana for a day, then I'll come home. Then I'll be in Texas for 2 weeks, then I'll come home. So I call them fly dates. That's what we call them in theater stuff. I don't know what other people call them but with musical theater works that I've done, they just call it a fly date. So you essentially go and you come back and you. But yeah, so I'll be on tour with them for the rest of the calendar, through 2021, and to see what 2022 looks like if more stuff opens up. And I want to get back on a bus though. Boy, do I miss those bus days. Yeah, for sure.
Well, if that happens, we'll have to have you back on the show again so you can talk a little about that experience.
Of course. Well, you came out to see me when I was living the high life.
Jersey.
Day.
It was so
cold. It was a good time. It was bitterly cold, and the ramen was as good as it was when it wasn't killing me.
Yeah, that was a good night. It was really great to see you play. It was cool to see. That was what, the State Theater in New Brunswick?
It was in New Jersey. Was it in New Brunswick, New Jersey? Is that what it was? Or Brunswick, New Jersey?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. We played 2 Jersey shows. I don't remember. That sounds right. Yeah, it was Northern Jersey. Was that right. Northern Jersey?
Yeah,
it was Northern. Yeah.
Yeah,
that's cool. Night. Well, that's my not to meander there, but that's like my favorite part about doing this stuff is like I love to travel. So the idea of being in a place and like just walking around the corner and seeing what's there, even if it's just like the local version of a 7-Eleven, like I grew up in the city where we had like convenience stores, they were like family owned or whatever, and I just love that. I love going to places. And so the first thing we did when you came up was we took a walk, loop around and went and found like a local place to eat and did some stuff. And so like, I don't know, like you can't beat that. Like to me, it's such a waste to go all these places and have no recollection of why any of them are different.
Yeah.
Or it's like, yeah, it was a parking space and a dressing room and a stage and a parking, and then I got back. And sometimes you're tired, admittedly. Sometimes you don't, but to make a point when you can, I think is what it's all about. And so I guess to people who maybe don't do that as the player, but do go to see these things, then I would say when you make the trip to go do that, make sure you see what's around, because I think that's the beauty of, not to get too sentimental or existential, but like I think that's part of the beauty of music is like think of something that you'll drive 4 or 5 hours to go see, but somebody from wherever thought it'd be a great thing to have them come stop here. Like it really does bring us together, not just in the sense of physically, but like it's that connection of like, I wanted to be here because it's important to me and it means something to me, and they're sharing it as musicians because it's important to them and it means something to them, and like and you talk about like the thousands of hours that have gone into what you see and what comes out. And so it's just something that I think is like it can be very quickly boiled down to, I bought a ticket, I showed up, I went home. And I think that that's missing out on a lot of why we even do it in the first place.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's
that's why I have people on. I mean, these are the kind of connections that this show I created just to get these. The whole point was that I could talk to all these people that I've met in my life that have invested so much time and so much effort into creating this stuff. And that's I think for me, much more than the practice, like the motivations about why we do what we do. That's the tip of the iceberg stuff that I want more people to know about. Like, because there's so much that goes into creating anything that when the stuff is actually like really good and it's actually firing in the way that it's supposed to, I think that's really magical. And like giving little windows into that joy, because it is a joy to be able to create in this way, I think that's a beautiful thing. So thank you for that, James.
Very well said. No, I'm hopeful that after everything in the last 13 14 months or whatever we're at now, I don't even know what the count is anymore, but
15.
I'm hopeful. 15. Oh, that was close. I'm hopeful that people will have, and I don't want to be too hopeful because I've been wrong before, but I'm hopeful that at least some people, if not a majority of people, will have an appreciation for what it takes to make life worth living in that sense, because to boil everything down to, I just never leave my house and everything can be done, is like, it drives people insane. And as it should, because that's not the way that, humans have existed for centuries, So I really hope that something like this helps people make that, like, if I'm going to buy a ticket to this concert, I'm going to stop by the local places and see what it is, or I'm going to make a weekend out of it if I have to drive 5 hours, because why would I not want to? Why would I not want to connect? And then same thing for those who are doing it, who are involved in the production of it. It makes it more special because, when you do it for 10, 15, 20 years, some of the people, the guy on our tour, the lighting designer for our tour had been the lighting designer for Boston. So you would talk about someone who's been, in the game. Right. So like to see him still going out and doing things was like, it spoke to me in that sense. Like, this guy understands that even though this could be his 500th tour in his life, he knew how important it was to like have experiences while he was doing it and not because when you think about how hard you work, how hard the competition is, how long the hours become, like in some cases you're paid well for certain things, but when you really parse it down, like for every second you're on tour, like it's like, oh, I made a nickel a minute. Like that's like for one show it was a good pay, but I was on the bus for a week for that show, so you have to find ways to make it not in a fake way, but you have to find way, like understand just how special of an opportunity it is, even to be in Richmond music directing like I was, like people don't get to do that. Yeah. And so to have the opportunity after all the craziness of last year, to have a vaccine, to have things moving in the right direction, and to be able to go there and have a semblance of like, I always appreciated being down there, but you better believe, like, I loved it. You know what I mean? Because I was like, this is, we almost lost this, or we kind of did lose this. You know, like, so the
Yeah,
mentality of how fragile life is, not just from a morbid sense, like mortality, but how
right.
fragile, like, in general is. You know,
Yeah,
just
like
like,
quality of life is something that I think a lot of us took for granted, and how much like coming together and having events of any kind. Um, yeah, I think we took that for granted because it was just too easy to do it. Or
yeah. And not to lay here too long. I do want to let you. I know you have things you want to cover, but I also, you talk about like things like personal growth and things like that. Goes into music too, but it's just for like, I also learned in the last year to stop caring so much about what other people think about what I think.
yeah,
Because I've been floored, and I'm sure many people have. I had a dear friend of mine who I've worked for years. He gave me one of my first jobs. Like, to me, he's a mentor and a um, like a life hero, but he'll tell me, like, oh, we're colleagues, like, and I'm like, no, we're not. Like, we'll never be on that level. Like, you're just, but anyway, we had this conversation. We hadn't talked since all this stuff. And our conversation was just like, can't believe some of the stuff. And he's like, I know. He's like, it's nice to talk to someone who understands, like, how, like you're saying, like, how much things changed or how much of an impact. So, like, I used to care so much and want so much approval. And I've just gotten to the point where, like, I don't have time for this. I got so much else going on. If you want to argue with me, just argue. Here's a picture of me. Argue with it. I'm moving on. Like, I have to do other things. And, like, I used to feed everything like that because I wanted to resolve the conflict, and I just got to the point where, like, and it's carried into my music. We're like, okay, so somebody else might play this better. I'm not. This is how I play it. Like, if it's good enough, then let's keep going. And if it isn't, then what do I, like, let's have a productive conversation about fixing it. But, like, just telling me it's not, like, oh, our last guy was better at that. Like, great. What's he, call him back. Like, I don't care anymore. Yeah, like, I used to care, and I'm like, now I don't care. Like, and it's kind of both. It's music and personal life. Like, where it's like, I
yeah.
don't care anymore. I don't have time to care anymore. I'm tired of getting so worked up over things. Like, I just need to get on with my life.
At a certain point, we are who we are, and if that works, that's great. If not, we need to find out where it does.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, it's all about balance, because there are things you need to work on. And I think that I say this to the people when I deal with, like, with music production, like when we work with bands. I'm like, I think people know at the end of the day, if they're like, I think people know how to be honest with themselves, even if they can't publicly be that way.
mm,
If you can improve, or if people are, if it's just ridiculous. You know what I mean? It's like, if you didn't put enough time into it. Like, I've played shows where I didn't put enough time into it, and I felt guilty, and I apologized a lot because I knew I didn't work hard enough on the material. Then I've played other shows where I'm like, I didn't have any more time. I did everything I could do. I put
yeah,
every minute I could schedule for doing this, I did, and it's going to be what it is.
right.
Not it's not going to be good. Not it's going to suck. It will be what it is, and I have to be okay with that because I know I did everything. And so I think,
Yeah,
I think we know, and that's why I've tried to put that on other people instead of, like, where I try to make, how can I help, or how can we fix this? Like, no, you know what you could have done, or or you don't, you did your best, and that's it.
right.
Just is what it is. It doesn't matter anymore. Like,
Yeah.
sorry, we should talk about something else because I'm gonna
No,
get
no, no. I think that's
let's get
a. I
on
think that's a.
here.
That's really important. I mean, all of this stuff. Like, I think sometimes people can get really kind of warped by their own kind of like inner pressure to be or do certain things. And I think an important part of um, learning how to make this kind of creative work, and whether that's music or whether you're a writer or whatever it is that you're doing, like at a certain point, you have to be able to critically be able to say, I did my best. And like,
Yeah,
this is as good as it's ever going to be right now. And I might be able to work up to something better in like another year, but this was the deadline that I was operating under. This was the material that I had in front of me to like get in hand. And that's it. I mean, that's kind of one of the things that I
yeah,
love about live performance. Like, you have a date when the show happens. You have so much
right.
material to learn, and whatever happens is what happens. And like, if you're lucky, you get like all these other opportunities to like polish it, or you can move on and do something else that's maybe not exactly the same. Like, maybe you're in another band or you're playing different material that you're better suited for. But like, I love that part. Like, it's kind of like, well, all right, that maybe wasn't my best show, but I definitely did my best. So
Yeah.
whatever that looks like, and I think that's a part of like the creative process and part of the performing process that maybe isn't talked about as much, because most of us like to see like a really brilliant end result, and maybe we want to have like the resume pieces or like the demonstration pieces that we share with everybody. But like, we've all had bad shows, we've all had like decent shows, otherwise we wouldn't keep doing it. But I mean, I know I probably learn more from the shows that I don't think are that great, because it, at least for me, it gives me usually really clear things that I want to practice. Like, okay,
Yeah.
like this bridge is a problem, and if we're going to keep playing this song, I really need to get like whatever was hanging me up nailed down.
Yeah.
And I think that is the thing that's good about even a bad show. So I think I'm really grateful for all that you shared today, James, because
Well, thanks.
it's on one level it's about kind of sharing our joy. On the other level, what I'm hoping really comes out more and more as Garden of Mutual Delights continues is maybe some of the challenges that some of us don't think about necessarily, but are you can't escape them. And like there are different ways that our own limitations manifest in different kinds of creative work, but I think you spoke to a lot of that today, and I'm really grateful for that.
Hey, well, I appreciate the invitation, and I appreciate just in general giving a platform for this to happen. So thank you. It's
Right
nice
on.
to. It's much needed on both sides, the joy and also the perspective, because you don't get to there is no end to the journey until it's literally over. And so I
Yeah.
think that's another that like we're pushing for this idea of perfection or the resume or the what, and just like you watch the ZZ Top documentary on Netflix. They'll talk about they're like we were never famous until we were already famous. Like we never had like we didn't have that like rise to fame. Nobody wanted us around, and then all of a sudden people were like, "We loved that album from 5 years ago," and they're like, so all of a sudden we were important. Like we weren't. We were like struggling and starving, and everything was awful. And like the one guy, I think it was either Billy or the other, but he's like, I went to Europe and just got away from everybody, like everything for like 2 years. I couldn't deal with it anymore. And like, but this like the perspective of what we just see them as it's ZZ Top. They're like legends of rock. They do that.
Right.
That's all you ever see. So I think
Right.
it's important to share that story. You know, the people that you admire, like you see them in their success. So even if they have failure, they can it's still like, oh, they messed up, but they still made it.
Yeah.
So you really can't process their failure because it's processed through their success, which is stupid, but it's real. And I just kind of want to share a fun story in closing. Just the other day, I think it was the first gig I played with this Rick K band. If you know the song Sarah Smile by Hall & Oates, it has this really nice guitar intro. Very subtle
Yep.
thing, but it's kind of naked to the wind. It's just the guitar. I played that great. It was one of the audition songs. I love it. Super easy, fun to play. And I just butchered it on the first gig. And you know what? A lot of me wanted to feel defeated or like I ruined it or it was a bad gig. But I guess going through all this growth or whatever, I just kind of laughed about it afterwards because I was like, for all the times I've played it right, you've all heard me play it right. So we know it's not a matter of Ken or Ken. Just didn't happen. And I played something that was like still in the scale. So it wasn't like this awful sound, but it wasn't the right melody. It didn't resolve correctly or the way that I wanted to. But whatever. And that was the one video that someone taped,
Oh no.
and that's the one clip I like was immediately tagging me, and they just loved it. They weren't tagging me like, "Look at what you messed up." It was just somebody who was a fan of his thing, and it
Mhm.
pops right up. And I said, "No, I can't worry about it because it was a great gig. We had tons of fun, and I'll play it right and I'll play something else wrong next time. Like I will mess something up because 2 hours of live music, you'll get something wrong.
Oh
Like
yeah,
it's gonna
that's
happen.
fine.
And so I was proud of myself because it almost was like getting a scratch on a new car, where it's like it was gonna happen. So now it's done and you can move on. Like yeah, you butchered something and nobody cared. Like it was fine, and
Mhm.
just. But I just thought it was funny that was the one clip that somebody got was that intro that like it just it's how it always is. But it was fine and it's fun and I played the heck out of that riff the next week when we played, and it was perfect. So no, but just yeah, it'll happen, and it'll be fun.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Cool.
Well, thanks, James.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Like I said, appreciate it. Great
Right on.
stuff.
Don't miss James on his Twitch channel every Tuesday and Thursday night. Watch, just follow the link in the chat, follow that, and you'll get your notifications when he's on. If you want to see him out on the road with Rick K, check out that link. See if he's coming anywhere near you, and go get some tickets. Until next time, thanks for tuning in. This is Jeremy Grafe, and this has been the Garden of Mutual Delights.